This is a demonstration of Cognitive Dissonance, a patch by Nick Cole-Hamilton, Submission 2 for Sonic Structures. Now here we can see the user interface of the patch. The theme that was given to my group was Dissonance, and amongst ourselves we agreed one person would do music, one person would do Foley and sound effects, and I would provide narrative or semantic dissonance. The way I decided to do that was through using random samples being played for different characters which I had selected for the films. You can see each one of these panels represents a different character. You've got the narrator, the mouse, the cat, the audience, and the scene transition music. You can see the controls which I've implemented for each of these, and then displayed next to that is mapping for the controller which I used for this patch, which is the Allen and Heath Zone K2 MIDI controller. Now it should be noted that each of these controls displayed have the ignore click function enabled, so they are purely for visual feedback. And here you can see representations of the random samples which have been loaded into each separate buffer, and these samples will be replaced when a new random sample is loaded into the buffer. So first of all, I'm going to demonstrate the controls and how they affect the user interface, and then we'll take a look at the inside of the patch. So first of all, demonstrating the narrator. You can see I have a volume control for him here. You can see this is mapped on the image to the left to this fader. Now if I hit the play button here, that'll play this sample.
And then with a smirk you edit.
So a new sample has been loaded.
I said some words to the close and holy darkness.
Now you can see I've also implemented a pan control here.
Perhaps a robin, too brave to say a word.
Now as well as this, I can control the play speed.
Poised and brittle.
Now I have also implemented two effects that you'll see here. Now I'm going to go into these effects in more detail in a moment. Now first of all, to demonstrate the ring modulation effect which I've implemented. And secondly, to show the delay effect. I'll do that again. You can see I've also implemented a separate control for the delay volume. Now the ring modulation is chained to the volume of the ring mod is chained to the volume of the main sample, as is the pan of the ring mod. So if I have ring mod on, true sample, you'll see that the volume and pan of the ring mod effect is controlled by the volume and pan of the main sample controls. However, the volume of the delay control has its own control, and the delay, as you may have noticed from listening to it, has its own pan envelope automation affected, which again we'll go into detail of in a moment. So that was the narrator that we've seen there. You can see we also have this mouse character.
Think what's around you.
And again,
How?
all the controls that are
Stay there. Stay there. Stay there.
are present for that.
Of course.
Play speed.
Notice the sky.
There's a cat.
The power of altered states of consciousness.
This is anything but real.
Tempted by the serpent. Tempted by the serpent.
And he's also got
Picture of the Antichrist.
pan controls and play.
Time goes short beyond imagination.
Now these top three panels I would class as the three main characters of the piece. And then we have beneath those two additional ones, we have the audience. And so the audience is laugh tracks and other kind of boos and jeers and so on. Now you see I haven't implemented a ring mod for the audience. I didn't feel it actually required it. I did experiment with it. However, I have implemented a delay. And I'm really quite fond of what the delay can do to the audience. So what we'll do is we'll turn the volume down, turn delay volume down, delay on, play speed right down. Through careful manipulation of the delay volume and play speed, you can get this really interesting effect, which is an effect which I use. patch itself, in the video demonstration itself. Something I particularly enjoyed implementing. And finally, we have scene transition music. It should be noted that this was a suggestion of Owen Green's. When he saw the patch performed, he said that this is something that could work quite well. And you can see that's really just for reacting to different events if I think that seems to be a relevant sample to play. Now, the patch is actually quite reactive in terms of its performance. I found that often when I was performing this, I was not just performer but audience as well. I was having, because these are random samples which are being loaded, I was just reacting to what was being generated, and it made every performance different. It also made every performance very interactive, very, very enjoyable. And not just was I reacting to my own patch, but I was also reacting to the patch of my collaborator in the group, Nicholas Fernandez, who built, as I said, Foley and sound effects patch along not the same lines but similar lines, and we found that we were both reacting a lot to what each other was doing, and that would influence how we would then go on perform, and then we would be reacting to how we were performing as well. So let's take a little look at the inside of this patch. Take it out of presentation mode, and here you can see all of my patchy goodness. Now, starting off with the loading of the random samples, here you can see I'm using an earn object, which is generating 23 random numbers in the instance of the narrator, because we have 23 narration samples. And then the select object is selecting the relevant sample to replace it into the buffer. Now, upon loading, one of these random numbers is generated, and then when each sample has finished playing, this section of the patch then sends a bang which loads a new sample in. So as soon as one sample is finished playing, a new random sample is loaded in, and thanks to the earn object, it's not a sample which has been played before. These are then loaded into this buffer here. So then we have the groove object here. Now here you've got, this is controlling the playback speed. We'll have a look. We look at the controls in a moment. You can see typically the narrator, he is set to 0.8, so he's set to just a little bit below standard playback, and it's to make his voice a little bit lower, a little bit deeper. Now you can see out of the groove we have a delay duplicate of playback. So the sample which is being delayed is not the main sample, it's a copy of it. So therefore, if the delay is triggered, it's actually a different sample that's being delayed. So the volume, that's how they have separate volume controls. However, in the case of ring mod, using this gate object, you either get the dry playback or the ring mod playback. So essentially, with the delay, you have wet and dry controls with the two separate volume controls. Whereas the ring mod, it's simply on or off. The effect is on or off. Okay. Now let's explore some of the effects which I generated for this. Now first of all, here we have the delay effect which I've made. Now you'll see the delay is going to two separate places. You've got the two separate delay outputs. The first one is going into this degrade object, which is resampling and changing the bit depth of the sample. And it's not just doing that to a set value, to set values, it's using drunk objects to determine how it's delayed. So we'll just turn the delay up there. And it makes this kind of changing distortion effect to that sample. It can be really quite rough. And I just think the drunk object makes it a lot more interesting, a lot more varied. The second delayed output is going into this low resonant filter, which is just providing a continual filter sweep through the frequencies of it, which gives it a little bit more distance, and in combination with the panners, which I'll go on to show you just now, each one has a panner, I think makes it a really, really interesting effect. So here I'm using line objects to pan from left to right over the course of 2 seconds, and the same for the low sweep, but in the opposite direction, so they're constantly passing each other, and it gives you this, you get this kind of drunken resampling effect, you get this continually shifting frequency sweep, and then also the kind of continually shifting pan sweeping, which I think it's quite an effective effect which I've generated there. Now again, the ring mod, the next effect. instead of ring modulation, of course, is multiplying two signals together, and instead of multiplying the sample which is being played by a static sine wave, I decided to multiply it by a sine wave which is constantly changing. Again, I'm using drunk objects rather, and I'm using one drunk chained by another. So the first drunk object, 600, sets the frequency range. It will be somewhere between 0 and 600, and the second determines the step size of the first. So here you've got a range of 200, a step size of 40 within that. So it will be somewhere in that range that the step size of this is, and it just means it's
I send
constantly
some
varying.
words to the close and holy
You see the way
darkness.
these numbers are changing, and I think that the way these two drunk commands chain together make it much more variable, much more interesting effect than just having either one drunk effect controlling the frequencies or a static sine wave in itself. Now, so this is the examples that I've shown you here are the same for the mouse and the cat. You'll notice the audience, as I mentioned, is lacking ring modulation, and the scene transition is lacking ring modulation, and the delay and panning delay, and pan to the delay. Now down here we have the individual volumes for the delays, individual volumes for the ring modulation. As mentioned earlier, volume and pan for ring modulation are just chained to the volume and pan of the main samples, so these receives here are exactly the same as what we will find in the individual sample things. You can see R per vol, R and R pan, and so on. Following on from this, we look in MIDI controls, and you can see all my control mappings here. Now I am making use of External Objects by Martin Parker here. I've used his preset storage, which is invaluable, and also his MIDI assignment objects, also equally invaluable, very, very useful objects here. And as I said, the controller that I'm using is the K2. I'm using the MIDI in and MIDI parse objects to get the information out of those, and then sending them to all of my relevant controls. And then down here you can see all of my user interface, what I've termed my user interface heap. Now it's worth noting that although I have got ignore click enabled for all of these are not feeding back in any way. So even if you could click on any of these, it wouldn't affect any of the volumes in any way. So just finally couple little bits of demonstration here.
It was snow.
I am Adam.
I belong with you.
This perennial loser.
Although the patch doesn't make use of any particular kinds of synthesis in any way, I think it is an interesting and very effective sound manipulation tool which I've created here. Not just sound manipulation, but random sound generator. The dissonance which is created is dissonance between the individual phrases, the two things the narrator might say in a row, or dissonance between what two characters are saying, or indeed dissonance between what is appearing on the screen. Because I am unaware, I made a point of making sure that all of the names of all of the samples that were going to be used were named generically. I'm unaware of what samples are being used. I mean, it's displayed in the waveform, but I can't tell from the waveform shape exactly what's going to be said. It's random for me, so I never know, and that's makes it so much more interactive for myself to use. So, this has been a demonstration of cognitive dissonance, a patch by Nick Cole Hamilton. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.